In the quiet town of Willow Creek, nestled between rolling hills and dense forests, the Thompson family was the envy of the neighborhood. Mark Thompson, a charismatic and driven real estate agent, had built a life many dreamed of. His recent marriage to Claire, a strikingly beautiful woman 10 years his junior, seemed to be the cherry on top of his already perfect life. Claire, with her warm smile and effortless charm, quickly became a beloved figure in the community. She embraced her role as a stepmother to Mark's 19-year-old son Ethan, who had moved back home after graduating high school to attend the local community college. On the surface, the Thompsons were the epitome of a happy, blended family. Ethan, a quiet and introspective young man, had always admired his father's success, but struggled to live up to his high expectations. Mark wanted Ethan to follow in his footsteps, pushing him to excel in school and pursue a career in business. But Ethan felt suffocated by the pressure, unsure of what he truly wanted for his future. Claire, sensing his inner turmoil, began to take a special interest in him. She offered him a listening ear, a shoulder to lean on, and a sense of understanding that Ethan had never experienced before. What started as innocent bonding over sleep, late-night conversations over coffee, shared laughs during family dinners, soon took a darker turn. Claire, despite her outward confidence, felt increasingly isolated in her marriage. Mark's long hours at work left her alone for much of the day, and the excitement of their whirlwind romance had begun to fade. She found herself drawn to Ethan's youthful energy and the way he hung on her every word. For Ethan, Claire's attention was intoxicating. She made him feel seen and valued in a way his father never had. The lines between stepmother and son began to blur, and before either of them fully realized what was happening, they were caught in the throes of a forbidden affair. Their relationship was a dangerous game, played out in stolen moments and hushed whispers. They grew bolder over time, taking risks that could have easily exposed them. Claire would linger in Ethan's room under the guise of helping him with his studies, while Ethan found excuses to stay home when Mark was away on business trips. The thrill of their secret kept them coming back to each other, even as the guilt began to gnaw at them. They knew their actions were wrong, but the pull was too strong to resist. Meanwhile, Mark remained oblivious, too consumed by his work to notice the subtle changes in his family. He saw Claire's growing closeness to Ethan as a sign of her dedication to their new family, never suspecting the truth. The cracks in their perfect facade were there, but they were easy to miss unless you knew where to look. A lingering touch here, a shared glance there, small details that, in hindsight, would paint a very different picture of the Thompson household. As the days turned into weeks, the tension in the house grew palpable. Ethan began to withdraw from his friends, his once bright future now clouded by the weight of his secret. Claire, too, became more guarded, her once effervescent personality dimmed by the constant fear of discovery. The stage was set for a tragedy that no one could have predicted. A chain of events that would unravel the lives of everyone involved. Little did they know, their carefully constructed world was about to come crashing down, leaving behind a trail of secrets, lies, and ultimately bloodshed. As the affair between Claire and Ethan deepened, so did their paranoia. What had once been a thrilling secret now felt like a ticking time bomb, threatening to destroy everything they had built. They became meticulous in their efforts to hide their relationship, crafting elaborate lies and devising intricate plans to avoid suspicion. Claire, ever the master manipulator, took the lead in their deception, using her charm and wit to steer Mark's attention away from the truth. Claire began to plant subtle seeds of doubt in Mark's mind, carefully crafting a narrative that would explain any odd behavior from Ethan. She casually mentioned that Ethan seemed distant lately, suggesting he might be struggling with the pressures of school or falling in with the wrong crowd. She even went so far as to hint that he might be experimenting with drugs, knowing that Mark's concern for his son would overshadow any other suspicions. Mark, trusting Claire completely, took her words to heart and began to keep a closer eye on Ethan, unaware that he was being manipulated. Ethan, meanwhile, found himself trapped in a web of lies that grew more tangled by the day. He struggled to balance his double life, constantly on edge, fearing that one wrong move could expose them. His once promising academic performance began to suffer, his grades slipping as the weight of his guilt and anxiety consumed him. He stopped spending time with his friends, isolating himself to avoid questions he couldn't answer. The once confident young man became a shadow of his former self, his eyes haunted by the secrets he carried. Claire, too, felt the strain of their deception. Her once effortless charm became forced, her smiles never quite reaching her eyes. She grew increasingly cold and calculating, her every action carefully calculated to maintain the facade. She began to resent Ethan for his inability to keep up the act, her frustration bubbling beneath the surface. Yet, despite the growing tension between them, they remained bound together by their shared secret, each relying on the other to keep the truth hidden. Their lies grew more elaborate as they tried to cover their tracks. They created alibis for their time together, claiming to be running errands or attending events separately. They communicated through coded messages and burner phones, taking every precaution to avoid leaving a trail. But the more they lied, the harder it became to keep their stories straight. Small inconsistencies began to creep in, unnoticed by Mark but glaringly obvious to anyone paying closer attention. The strain of their double lives began to take its toll on both Claire and Ethan. Ethan's guilt weighed heavily on him, his conscience gnawing at him as he struggled to reconcile his actions with his love for his father. He began to have nightmares, waking in a cold sweat, haunted by visions of their secret being exposed. Claire, on the other hand, became increasingly ruthless, her desperation to protect her comfortable life driving her to new extremes. She began to see Ethan as a liability, a loose end that needed to be tied up. As the days turned into weeks, the tension in the Thompson household became unbearable. The once happy family was now a powder keg, waiting for a spark to ignite it. Claire and Ethan's relationship, once a source of excitement and passion, had become a prison, trapping them in a cycle of lies and manipulation. The stage was set for a confrontation that would change their lives forever, though neither of them could have predicted just how far things would go. The web of lies they had spun was beginning to unravel, and when it finally came apart, there would be no going back. The breaking point came on an unremarkable Tuesday evening, though the events that unfolded would leave an indelible mark on the Thompson family. Mark, who had been away on a business trip, decided to cut his trip short, hoping to surprise his wife and son with an early return. He arrived home just after sunset, his heart light with the thought of spending an unexpected evening with his family. But as he stepped through the front door, the scene that greeted him shattered his world. The house was eerily quiet, the only sound the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. Mark called out for Claire and Ethan, but there was no response. He made his way upstairs, his footsteps echoing in the stillness, and pushed open the door to Ethan's room. What he saw there would haunt him for the rest of his life. Claire and Ethan were locked in an embrace, their secret laid bare in an instant. The shock and betrayal that washed over Mark were overwhelming, his mind struggling to process what his eyes were seeing. The confrontation that followed was explosive. Mark's initial shock quickly gave way to rage, his voice shaking with anger as he demanded an explanation. Claire and Ethan, caught off guard, were frozen in place, their faces pale with fear. Words were exchanged, accusations hurled like daggers, but the damage was already done. The fragile facade of their perfect family had been shattered, leaving behind a chasm of pain and mistrust that seemed impossible to bridge. In the days that followed, the Thompson household became a battleground. Mark, devastated by the betrayal, vacillated between anger and despair. He couldn't understand how the two people he loved most could have done something so unthinkable. Claire, desperate to salvage what was left of her life, painting Ethan as the aggressor, and herself as a victim, she claimed that Ethan had taken advantage of her vulnerability, twisting the truth to shift the blame onto him. Ethan, feeling betrayed by both his father and Claire, spiraled into a dark place, his guilt and anger consuming him. The tension in the house was palpable, every interaction charged with unspoken resentment and pain. Mark, unable to look at either of them without feeling a surge of anger, withdrew into himself. spending long hours at work or locked in his study. Claire, once the picture of confidence, became increasingly erratic, her emotions swinging wildly from one extreme to the other. Ethan, caught in the crossfire, felt like a stranger in his own home, his once close relationship with his father now a distant memory. As the days turned into weeks, the strain began to take its toll on all of them. The once vibrant household was now a shadow of its former self, filled with silence and tension. Claire and Ethan, bound together by their shared secret, found themselves increasingly isolated, their relationship strained to the breaking point. The lies and manipulation that had once kept them together now threatened to tear them apart. The stage was set for a tragedy that no one could have predicted. The cracks in the Thompson family had grown too deep to ignore, and the pressure was building with each passing day. It was only a matter of time before something gave way, and when it did, the consequences would be devastating. The breaking point had been reached, and there was no turning back. The storm that had been brewing in the Thompson household finally erupted on a cold, rain-soaked night. The tension had reached a fever pitch, the air thick with unspoken anger and resentment. Mark, unable to sleep, sat in the dimly lit living room, a glass of whiskey in his hand as he stared into the flickering flames of the fireplace. His mind raced with thoughts of betrayal, his heart heavy with the weight of what he had discovered. He couldn't shake the image of Claire and Ethan together, the betrayal cutting deeper with each passing day. Upstairs, Ethan lay in his bed, staring at the ceiling, his mind a whirlwind of guilt and fear. He had tried to avoid his father, but the tension between them was unbearable. He knew he needed to confront Mark, to try to explain, though he had no idea how to even begin. Claire, meanwhile, paced her bedroom, her nerves frayed. She could feel the walls closing in, the lies she had spun beginning to unravel. She knew it was only a matter of time before everything came crashing down. The confrontation began when Ethan, unable to bear the silence any longer, ventured downstairs. He found Mark sitting in the living room, his face etched with pain and anger. The moment their eyes met, the dam broke. Words were exchanged, sharp and bitter, each one cutting deeper than the last. Mark's voice rose as he demanded answers, his anger boiling over. Ethan, overwhelmed by guilt and fear, tried to explain, but his words only fueled Mark's rage. Claire, hearing the commotion, rushed downstairs, her heart pounding. She tried to intervene, to calm Mark down, but her presence only made things worse. Mark turned his anger on her, his voice shaking with betrayal as he accused her of destroying their family. The argument escalated, the tension in the room reaching a breaking point. In a fit of rage, Mark grabbed the fireplace poker, his hands trembling as he brandished it like a weapon. Ethan, seeing the danger, stepped in to protect Claire. But the situation spiraled out of control. The two men struggled, the poker swinging wildly as they grappled with each other. Claire screamed, her voice drowned out by the chaos. In a moment of desperation, Ethan managed to wrestle the poker from Mark's grasp, but the momentum carried him forward, and before he could stop himself, he struck his father with a force that sent him crashing to the ground. The room fell silent, the only sound the crackling of the fire and the pounding of the rain outside. Mark lay motionless on the floor, a pool of blood spreading beneath him. Ethan stood frozen, the poker still clutched in his hand, his face pale with shock. Claire, her hands trembling, knelt beside Mark, her mind racing as she tried to process what had just happened. In the chaos that followed, Claire's instincts took over. She knew they couldn't call for help, not without exposing the truth. She quickly devised a plan, her mind working furiously to cover up the crime. She and Ethan worked together to stage the scene, making it look like a break-in gone wrong. They cleaned up the evidence, their movements frantic and hurried, their hearts pounding with fear. By the time the police arrived, the house was eerily calm, the storm outside masking the chaos that had unfolded within. Claire and Ethan played their parts perfectly, their grief and shock convincing enough to fool the officers at first. But as the investigation unfolded, the cracks in their story began to show, the lies they had spun unraveling with each passing day. The night of the murder had changed everything, and there was no going back. In the weeks following Mark's death, Claire and Ethan tried to maintain their facade of innocence, but the weight of their guilt and the pressure of the investigation began to take its toll. The police, initially sympathetic to their loss, grew suspicious as inconsistencies in their story emerged. A neighbor came forward, claiming to have heard raised voices and a loud commotion coming from the Thompson house on the night of the murder. Detectives, now digging deeper, began to piece together a timeline that didn't add up. The once solid alibis provided by Claire and Ethan started to crumble under scrutiny, and the cracks in their story became impossible to ignore. Forensic evidence soon exposed the truth. Blood spatter analysis revealed that Mark's injuries were inconsistent with a break-in, and fingerprints on the fireplace poker pointed directly to Ethan. Claire's attempts to manipulate the investigation only raised more red flags. Her alibis fell apart under scrutiny, and her erratic behavior during interviews drew suspicion. Detectives began to see through her carefully constructed lies, uncovering the affair and the motive behind the murder. The once charming stepmother was now the prime suspect in a case that had captivated the town. The final blow came when Ethan, overwhelmed by guilt and fear, broke down during questioning. He confessed to the crime, revealing the affair and the events of that fateful night. His voice trembled as he recounted the struggle with his father, the moment he had struck him, and the desperate attempt to cover it up. Claire, realizing the game was up, tried to shift the blame entirely onto Ethan, but her efforts were in vain. The evidence against them was overwhelming, and their once ironclad bond crumbled under the weight of their betrayal. Both Claire and Ethan were arrested and charged with Mark's murder. The trial captivated the town, the shocking details of their affair and the subsequent cover-up making headlines. The courtroom was packed as the prosecution laid out the case, painting a picture of a family torn apart by secrets and lies. Claire, once the picture of poise, sat stoically, her face a mask of defiance. Ethan, on the other hand, looked broken, his eyes downcast as the weight of his actions bore down on him. In the end, justice was served. Claire was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, her once comfortable life reduced to a cold cell in the company of strangers. Ethan, deemed a willing participant in the crime, received a lengthy prison sentence, his youth and future stripped away in an instant. The verdict brought a sense of closure to the community, but the scars left behind were deep and lasting. The Thompson family, once the picture of suburban perfection, was now a cautionary tale of secrets, lies, and the devastating consequences of betrayal. The documentary ends with a haunting question: was their affair worth the price they paid? The story of Claire and Ethan serves as a grim reminder of how easily lives can be destroyed when secrets are allowed to fester, and how the pursuit of passion can lead to unimaginable tragedy. The house on Maple Street, now empty and silent, stands as a somber reminder of the lives that were lost and the choices that led to their downfall. The tale of the Thompson family is one that will linger in the minds of those who hear it, a chilling testament to the darkness that can lie beneath the surface of even the most perfect lives. The story of the Thompson family left an indelible mark on the quiet town of Willow Creek, a chilling reminder of how easily the facade of a perfect life can crumble. In the aftermath of the trial, the community grappled with the shocking revelations, struggling to reconcile the image of the happy family they had once admired with the dark truth that had been exposed. The house on Maple Street, once a symbol of success and stability, now stood as a grim monument to betrayal and tragedy. Claire and Ethan, once bound together by their shared secret, were now separated by prison walls. Claire, sentenced to life without parole, spent her days in isolation, her once charming demeanor replaced by bitterness and regret. She had lost everything: her comfortable life, her reputation, and the man she had once claimed to love. Ethan, serving a lengthy sentence in a different facility, was haunted by the memory of that fateful night. The guilt of his actions weighed heavily on him, and he often wondered if things could have been different if he had found the courage to walk away. Mark's death left a void that could never be filled. Friends and family mourned the loss of a man who had been a pillar of the community, his life cut short by the very people he had trusted most. The tragedy served as a stark reminder of the fragility of human relationships and the destructive power of secrets. As the years passed, the story of the Thompson family faded from the headlines, but its impact lingered. The house on Maple Street was eventually sold, its new owners unaware of the dark history that had unfolded within its walls. The town of Willow Creek moved on, but the memory of the scandal remained, a cautionary tale whispered among neighbors and passed down to younger generations. The documentary, with its gripping narrative and shocking twists, left viewers with a sense of unease, forcing them to confront uncomfortable truths about human nature. It asked difficult questions about love, loyalty, and the lengths people will go to protect their secrets. In the end, the story of Claire and Ethan was not just a tale of murder and betrayal, but a sobering exploration of the consequences of choices made in the shadows. The final scene fades to black, leaving viewers with a lingering sense of dread and a haunting question: how well do we really know the people we love? The story of the Thompson family serves as a chilling reminder that sometimes the darkest secrets are hidden in plain sight.